There he is, Marshall. So Marshall Ganz, just as a brief introduction, Marshall is just a really legendary organizer and is more than anything else. I think Marshall is just like the loveliest guy. He's like the loveliest guy. Just has such a big heart and cares so much about the world, and has done so much work over many decades as an organizer with folks like Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, helped to organize Obama's campaign in 2008 and 2012, and again, is to this day working tirelessly. Every time I see you, Marshall, you are always in a meeting, doing something, working with somebody in the world. So I know, we just appreciate you so much for taking your time to be here. Marshall has spoken, I think, at every BioSummit. Certainly, the very first BioSummit, I thought, when you gave that talk on Are We a Movement? That was, I think, one of the historic moment, I think, for the movement to, in a way, be self-conscious of itself in that way. And so Marshall each year has talked a lot about different ways in which we can structure movements. And so this year, we're so excited to have him speak and share a little bit of some of his thoughts on structure and on governance. So each year we've been kind of evolving as a group, and we're thinking a lot now about how do we ultimately structure our movement. And as a reminder, after Marshall finishes, we're gonna wrap up this morning with a co-designed exercise again. So with that, everybody, can you please join me in welcoming Marshall Ganz? So let's get some snaps, some claps, some emoji love. Yes, thank you guys. Marshall, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks so much, David. Is it morning still? I guess it's technically, well, no, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. That's much more appropriate. Yeah, how about responding back in your own language? Let's just hear, let's try good morning, whatever time of day it is there. A good morning, a good afternoon, good evening. Unmute, please, so we can hear what it sounds like, all right?
So Clayton, we're gonna need to change the setting, the security setting, and let everybody unmute. Let's do this all together.
Yeah.
We'll try this in real time. Okay, so everybody should be able to unmute themselves now. I realized I have power here too. So everybody unmute yourselves and let's say hello or good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
Buenas tardes.
Morning.
Yeah. Did we hear from everyone? I'm not sure we heard from everyone.
Buenos días.
Yeah.
Buenos días.
Good morning.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
All right.
Good morning, Marshall.
Hello.
Buen día. Good. Buen día. All right. No, Sabaca.
Buenos días.
All right. It's a beautiful cacophony. No, and it's the sound of the future. And I just think it's, I think we should celebrate it. So thank you for the welcoming. It's also been my privilege to work with and learn from Abel, who has been working with this whole project since the beginning. He and David go back even before the days of this movement, which is also kind of cool. I think what I'll try to do is just make some general statements, and I hope we can have more conversation about this, because structure is one of those words that, when it's often said, structure, right away people's reaction is, oh yeah, I want a structure. Is that the reaction? Or is the reaction, oh, I don't know about this. Oh, it's constraint. It's not so great. And unfortunately, that is a very common reaction these days for a whole variety of reasons. The problem with that is that structure, every bit as much as storytelling and strategizing and building relationship, is something as human beings we do all the time. Whether we do it with intentionality or not, anytime that we're working with somebody else and we agree on when we're going to meet, or we agree on what our roles are, or we agree on the time we're going to do something by, we're creating structure. I mean, that's how we create structure, because structure is really, it's commitments we make to one another about how we're going to work together. That's really what it is. And, it comes from the Latin, the word for build, structure, like construction. And so structuring is a building process. And it's a building process of something that enables us to collaborate, to work together, not something that oppresses us and so forth. I know a lot of us have had experience with very oppressive structures, but the problem is that sometimes we are so reactive to that we say, ooh, no structure, But then you get into a problem that sociologist Joe Freeman, a feminist sociologist in the early 70s, described as the tyranny of structurelessness. And what she means is that anytime human beings get together, they're going to create some forms of structure. The question is, are they going to be visible, transparent, and accountable? Or are they going to be off the books, invisible, murky? I don't know about you, but I've had the experience in these groups where somebody's deciding, but who is it? Or, well, wait, when do we decide that? Or, you know what I'm talking about, I think, I suspect, and things get very murky. And here we are, we bring all our resources, our intentionality, our intellect, our imagination, and we can't agree on how to run a damn meeting. I mean, you know, it's really, I mean, just think about that for a minute. And now maybe for some folks, this is not a problem. I find a lot of my students come to the Kennedy School and really don't know how to run a meeting. I mean, if you're doing anything, organizations basically just do three things. They meet, they act, and they celebrate. If they're good organizations, they celebrate what they're doing as well. But we often, I mean, we're meeting all the time. Sometimes, do we have an agenda? Oh, no, we don't need an agenda. We'll just figure it out. Oh, are we going to, what if somebody that's supposed to show up doesn't show up? Well, you know, they probably had a good reason. That's okay. We don't want to be police. I suspect you have some familiarity with what I'm talking about. And from my perspective, what we're doing is sabotaging ourselves when we don't take responsibility for structuring ourselves, for making agreements about how we're actually going to work together. And agreements, there's three things that, I guess, angles on structure that I find very useful in looking at organizations. One is, how is the work organized? In other words, is the work collaborative? Is it everybody on an assembly line? Is it one person like telling everybody else what to do? Is there actual engagement? How is the work that we do with each other organized? That's a fundamental dimension of structure. But then the second is, how do resource flows work? You know, what are the resources we need for our work? Where do they come from? Who's got them? How do I get them? How do we share them or not? That's another critically important dimension of structure, not just in the books, but in reality. And the third one that I'll say a little bit more about is, how are we structuring, scary word, authority, okay? And by authority, I simply mean, again, the agreements we make with each other about how to govern ourselves. How are we going to make decisions? How are we going to manage commitments? How are we going to deal with time? Those are sort of basic kinds of questions of governance. And, you know, I know in a lot of corporate structures, it's not a question. You know, authority flows from the top down, it's pretty clear. And then they may create certain zones in which people can govern themselves, but fundamentally, the authority goes with ownership. The authority is based on capital, and then it's delegated in different ways. Democratic organizations, its authority is delegated upward. In other words, the source of authority are the participants themselves, and they delegate the authority upward. Sometimes we confuse these two. We say both are bureaucratic. Well, bureaucracy is a way of delegating authority downward or outward. You know, democratic organization is a way of delegating upward, like in a federal structure, like a local group, and then it's part of a larger set of groups, and so then they may need to delegate some authority to a second tier or a third tier. And having tiers is not inherently oppressive, I want to argue. And I know, I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion here. But from my perspective, there's value in being an insider and value in being an outsider. You know, the word strategy comes from the Greek it's Greek strata, was how you describe a field. And the army was called a strata because the idea was to take the field. A general was called a strategos, and he would go sit up on the hill and develop a theory of battle based on an overview. And the soldiers, the ranks of soldiers were called tacticas. That's where we get strategy and tactics. Strategy being the theory of it, and tactics being the activities that we do. Now, the problem is that you need both forms of understanding. You need intimate knowledge of what's actually happening, but you also need to be able to put that in context and put it in perspective, because the challenge is the fish and water challenge. I mean, you know who discovered water? Anybody know? Yeah, the answer is it wasn't a fish. I mean, here are scientists. We should know who discovered water. Geez, I mean, come on. Yeah, the answer is I don't know, but it wasn't a fish. That's supposed to be funny, but it makes the point that we're always fish in the water in our own water, and we don't see it. And it can be enormously helpful for someone who's outside the water to ask us to articulate what it is, to ask us the questions that enable us to gain a perspective that we don't have when we're so deeply immersed. And so for me, this tension, balancing these tensions of inside outside, is also an important dimension of the structures we create. Because either we build that in or we don't. And I don't know about you all, but it's pretty easy to get totally immersed in one sort of local dimension and forget that it's part of something where you need help from others, where there's cross-learning that needs to be done, where there are structural problems that are so problematic that unless we coordinate with one another, we can't possibly get the power we need to deal with them. And so that's just a second dimension. I'm suggesting structure that facilitates tiers so that it isn't just one size fits all. Now, the questions in governance to me that are most important is how are you going to make decisions? And who is going to participate in making decisions? And who's going to make decisions for who? I mean, if you can get clarity about this, I don't know, maybe it's happened with you. It certainly happened with me. We're in the middle of a real challenging issue and we're trying to decide it. And at the same time, we're trying to decide how we're going to decide it. When you got those two things happening together, it's a real mess. It's a real mess. And so the argument here is to do the work ahead of time to make a decision about how you're going to make decisions, and then allow that framework to be a way in which you can focus on the decisions that you have to make. But this question, who's going to make them? Who participates? Under what conditions? About what? These are not, how can I say, there's no one way or a right, wrong way, but they're questions about which decisions have to be made if you're going to work together. That's one. A second one is about commitments. It's about when we say we are going to do something. In other words, it's very hard to have a framework in which we exercise rights without accepting obligations. In other words, it's like, yeah, you get voice, but somebody just walks in off the street, gets to decide about what project you're going to focus on. Well, no. What's the boundary? What's the boundaries of inclusion? Of sometimes it's called member or not member. But what are the terms under which you get to participate in making decisions, and what's your commitment in return? In other words, voice and loyalty go together. Otherwise, the only option you leave people is exit. I don't like it, I'm gone, or I'm here. And so that is also this question of governance. How do I earn the opportunity to make choices here and to be part of the decision making, and at what level? So commitment then is a second dimension, and how we actually handle it. You have the meeting, somebody was committed to do something by the meeting and they didn't. So we say, oh, well, he's a good person, we're adults, and next time. Sometimes what you wind up doing, I don't know about yourselves, but sometimes what you wind up doing is spending half of your meeting bringing up to date the people who missed the last meeting. And so then it goes on and on like that. And when you think how precious and valuable your time is, boy, can you spend it that way? there's a certain kind of stability and continuity that goes with governing and goes with making decisions. And so what are the terms of that? You know, how are people held accountable? How do we hold each other accountable is really the question. It's not about who the police is, but is, you know, if you don't show up, well, I don't know, do you have to sing a song and dance for 10 minutes? It almost doesn't matter, but there's got to be some mechanism of accountability if commitments are to be real. A third dimension I want to just focus on is time. Time's our most precious resource. And so how we use our time really matters. And I have a friend who worked for a union. He described what he called the chicken dog problem. What's the chicken dog problem? Chicken dog problem is that what he found was happening in meetings was whatever the first item on the agenda was, that's where all the discussion was. The decision about the future of the organization was in the last 10 minutes. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. It's not uncommon. And so it's, again, being intentional about how you structure your time with each other. There's no one right way to do it, but by doing it and by having a way to do that, you can plan, you can do prep work that makes sense. Look, I may be just, you know, I don't know, singing a song everybody knows here. These seem like such basic things, but unfortunately, they're very elusive, or they can be, in the particular cultures within which we're operating. So thinking about time, about decision-making, about commitment, obligation, how do you manage those things? No one answer, but I'd argue that those are things you need to decide. It's like a constitution-making moment where you sort of decide, here's how we're going to operate. Let me just stop there and see, do we have time for some questions, discussion?
Yes, we absolutely.
David, is that enough of a foundation to get going?
Yeah, I think that was fantastic, Marshall. And we definitely have time. We have about at least another 10 minutes or so, and then we're going to try and go to do the co-design exercise. But let's definitely take some questions. And Abel, feel free as well if you want to unmute and chime in as well. So let's look in the questions in the chat. For everybody, feel free to write questions in the chat. We can also, if you also raise your hands, we can do some hand raising and call some people out as well to try to answer questions.
You use the blue hands? You use the participant thing?
Yeah, we've got some blue hands that we were practicing this earlier this morning for folks who are learning how to use Zoom. Okay, it looks like we've got a question from Rachel. Rachel, actually, I'm gonna change the setting here and allow you to unmute yourself. Oh, actually, I think Clayton already.
Yes, I just got to unmute myself. I'm not sure where's my video. Yes, so I just wanted to say in making decisions in our group, I'm in Switzerland right now. It's still before sunset time. And I've been wondering quite often when we have everybody who's involved is just working from their own passion, they're volunteers, it's really hard to push people for deadlines, for choosing things. And we have regular committee meetings, but I just wonder how far we can push the whole open science thing without a little bit of incentive for people, more incentives that are positive, but that aren't necessarily, you know, profit-making things.
Yeah, well, okay, we're not going to argue about profit-making, but I am going to argue about asking people to make commitments. Because, you know, we tend to think that, oh, there's a certain amount of commitment space left, and we got to be careful not to use it up. That's sort of a hydraulic model of commitment, but it doesn't work that way. If a person gives money, they're more likely to volunteer, not less. It's consistency theory. Once we act in a way that commits us to a certain kind of identity, we're part of this, we're more likely to give more, not less. Albert Hirschman, the economist, distinguishes between what he calls economic resources that deplete with use and moral resources that grow with use. Well, commitment's a moral resource, you know, and motivation and skill and learning and all that stuff. The more we use it, the more it grows. I think we can sometimes make the mistake of underestimating our people. You know, there's reasons they're there. There's reasons they care. It's not like volunteers are doing us a favor of some kind. Actually, we're creating an opportunity in which they can make a difference. Because if you really think about what you're motivated to commit to, is it because it's easy or because you experience it as being valuable? In other words, this is a use of my time. It can make a difference, and it's a good use of my time. I'm going to do it. You know, there's these things about, you know, give $5 a year and you're going to transform a child's life and all that stuff. It's just, it's kind of silly, frankly. It's worse than silly because it substitutes gesture for commitment. And commitment is what drives volunteer effort, because that's the coin, is people's time. And so being clear about it, that it's not a one-way deal. People aren't doing you favors. You're creating opportunities. And if you don't work with them to set the ground rules, you know, yeah, this person shows up all the time. This one never shows up. They both get the same voice. Really? Should they? I mean, anytime, if you want to have a there that's there, there's commitments to make. And, you know, it's just like, oh, this is great. You're going to be part of our committee. Here's what's required. Yes, no, you can't force anybody to do anything. That's not the point. It's being honest about the kind of commitment that really can help build what you're trying to build. And then they own it. And then they have some ownership in it. It's not just they're flaky and show up or don't show up. So I don't know. I think we sometimes really make a mistake about infantilizing volunteers rather than really engaging with them as adults who make choices about their time and what they want to invest it in, and making damn sure that their investment is a good one.
Marshall, your comments, I think, at least in particular for this community and for our organizing team, I think is totally true. Our organizing team this is our 4th BioSummit. We've grown in size every year, and our own standards for each other and the level of the work and the commitment that I've seen year after year, it just blows my mind. Like the more people engage, it's like the more, you know, you want to be involved and dig in. Of course, everybody's got cycles too. Of course, people, you know, step back and so on, and that happens too. But I think overall, at least with a culture and a cohort, that's something that I think we've seen as well, is just, you know, when you give to something and then you also get that nourishment of feeling like you're a part of something that's bigger than yourself. You know, it's something that I think is really powerful.
I do want to say that my perspective on this stuff does not come from business school. It comes from deep involvement in civil rights movement, farm worker movement, in political mobilizing, and work in the Middle East, work in Latin America. So I guess I'm just trying to say that this is not based on some theory that comes from business school. It's actually rooted in experience, rooted in movements more than anything else, and social movements. Even though now I teach at the Kennedy School. So I sort of did the organizing for 28 years and then came back and finished my undergraduate degree and then did a PhD. So I sort of was a sequential sort of practice, theory, and then teaching. So I'm just, in all modesty, I'm saying that, but just so you're not confused where this is coming from.
Wonderful. And Abel, I think you wanted to chime in. Yeah, go for it.
That's right. Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, I just wanted to lift up, Marshall, thanks. First of all, so excited you're here. Thank you for sharing with us today. You were just speaking about commitment and the power of that on a team. And while you were speaking, Yoshi Goto chimed in with a question. And the question was, can you explain more about the Snowflake leadership model? How do you balance between horizontal and vertical hierarchy structures to encourage a shared sense of ownership rather than passive participation? I thought that was a great question because you were just speaking about the power of commitment and really giving ownership to folks. I think that I just want to tack on one layer of complexity for the BioSummit in particular, is that, you know, how do you build the Snowflake model that can kind of span across regions and countries so that there is that kind of shared commitment and shared decision making, not just in one region or one team, but what does it look like to really, you know, in the context of a movement, develop that kind of capacity for the structures that we have here?
Oh, well, first step is, no, I'm kidding. Yeah, no, it's not like that. You have to work at it. You know, in the Obama campaign, we used a Snowflake model where we had like a district team, and then members of that team formed teams at the next level, at sort of the town, let's say, and then they formed teams at the next level. Now, of course, that was a campaign, and responsibility was being delegated, but it was within a certain defined scope. And we also had a coaching structure to go with that. In other words, that there was a way to sustain learning in how to make it operate. I don't think there's any one way here. I think though that in movements, I think that one way that I think about it is, how do learners become teachers? How do you build in leadership development? How do you build in that sort of so-called followers can become leaders? And I know that word leadership is very charged. And so I'm not talking about authoritative command. I'm talking about the work of enabling people to work together to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. But it's a question. I mean, if let's say there's a, I don't know, a state or a country or a region, and let's say you have 50 groups there. And let's say each group is authorized to make decisions about its own affairs, okay? But there are some concerns that span locality. So you create a regional entity, and then each group may have a person on that regional entity. And then they're empowered to decide certain things that each local group has already given their consent to being part of. I mean, it's a delegated structure. And then let's say that regional group, then let's say there's a statewide group. And so what you're doing is creating a decision-making structure. It also may parallel the way the work is being done. In other words, you have a local team, and then the next team is offering some leadership, guidance, support, and so forth. There's no magic way here. It's just, I think we have to lose our fear of tiers. And if we don't want to think of them as tiers, think of them as circles. Maybe that's more friendly. You know, there's a core, and then there's next, although we don't like peripheries, do we? But whatever, because you have to be able to figure out how to scale decision-making as well as how to scale the work and the whole thing. Because if you don't scale decision-making in some way, then you wind up, every local group just basically goes its own way. And maybe that's what you want. Maybe that's how it should work. You know, maybe that's perfect.
So
I haven't
Marshall,
found it's very perfect. Yeah.
so,
Go ahead.
oh yeah, sorry, Marshall. I was going to say, you know, one thing that's been interesting for us, at least for within the BioSummit, is that I think the BioSummit, at least as an organizing group, is very much the Snowflake model, right? So for example, like later this afternoon, we've got these, or throughout the whole weekend, we have these different 11 tracks. Each one is their own committee that's organizing on their own. There are also different aspects of how this particular event gets launched. Then those folks are also empowered to organize in their own kind of group and make decisions and so on. And then part of what we're doing on Sunday is the fellows themselves are structured both in learning pods that were international, but then also in regional pods. And so those regions are meeting on Sunday. And so those fellows have taken on a leadership responsibility to basically organize folks in their region, very, very similar to what you described. So this is something we're experimenting with, and we're trying it. We're riding the bike, and we're seeing how it goes. But it's, I think internally, at least, it's been a reasonably effective structure, I think, as we've been growing our organizing team. So I just wanted to lift up that point as an experience for everybody here. And I also wanted to call on Kevin. Oh, but Marshall, do you want to respond to that really quickly?
Well, I just want to say that you know, a lot is shaped by the conditions under which we operate. Now, you know, I don't have to tell you, we have this new technological capacity that we can use to marginalize people or empower people. I mean, it's, you know, it's used in, it depends if we're trying to make money or if we're trying to, you know, teach, or if we're trying to heal people or whatever it might be. But, you know, obviously we're using it right now, otherwise we couldn't be happening. So it opens up possibilities for governance and for participation that are quite different than what was available before. And so I think how we use that, and keeping our eye on the ball of what it is we're really trying to, what are the values that are driving what we're trying to do? Are we trying to use this tech in a way that we can make the most money possible? Are we trying to use this tech in the way to facilitate as much learning as possible? What are really the core values that drive our use of the tech, I think is really critical. And as a community, as an organization, agreement about that makes a big, big difference. Big, big difference of where we channel our creativity.
So I want to go to Kevin. Kevin, your hand has been raised for a long time, so go for it. And Clayton, if we can unmute Kevin.
All right, I
Kevin.
think you can hear me now.
Where's Kevin?
Hi, everyone.
Where are you?
I'm in Montreal.
Oh, okay, good.
And I had a question about maybe this idea of transitioning followers to leaders. And I think in a lot of like the fellows training and also over the years of looking at biolabs, I find a lot of them center around like one individual who's like the main organizer or who gets always featured in the journalism and the press. But that person's not going to be around forever. So how do you transition that story out, and how do you prepare the next leader, or is it about being distributed from the start? Like how do you manage that scenario where we need to move on?
Kevin, it's a great question, and I think sometimes we complain about I have to do everything. Nobody will help me. Now, if you really look at that, you have to ask yourself, is that because I'm not letting anybody? Do I need to hold on to this control because my mama told me if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself? Do I have enough trust and accountability in others with whom I'm working to actually seed elements of responsibility? See, I think structure, the way you structure work, has a whole lot to do with whether you're developing leadership or not. If you operate where there is this one, charismatic persona, and whatever that person says goes, well, that's what you got. And it's unlikely to develop a lot of leadership. On the other hand, well, one of the reasons I like the movie Selma, I don't know how many people saw Selma about Dr. King and the Selma to Montgomery thing, but it showed that it wasn't just Dr. King. It wasn't like this genius who was making it all happen. This was a team effort. There was controversy, there was discussion, there was debate, and there was room for leadership development. So I think how you structure that. So like I say, there's one persona, everything goes through that one persona, that's what you got. On the other hand, if you can figure out how to chunk out pieces of responsibility, then you're beginning to develop leadership. And because without delegating responsibility, not just for a task, but responsibility, there's no ownership, there's no incentive to grow and learn and so forth. So it's how you structure it. Just a little aside, this is not a new problem. In the book of Exodus, chapter 18, we find Moses trying to do all the work himself. And his father-in-law arrives, Jethro, and he takes a look at this. All these people are around Moses, like towering over Moses. Do this, do this. He says, hey, this is not good. You're going to burn yourself out. You're going to burn the people out. Among every 10 persons, find one who can lead the decision-making there. Among those 10, one. Among those 10, one. And then the most critical things, let them come to you. And so he does it, interestingly enough. And there's a whole other story around why he's able to do it. He actually is able to do it because he's been reconnected with his family and reconnected with his creator, that gives him the room to not treat the work as his sole identity, which gives him a little more room to allow responsibility to go to others. So look, Jethro, his father-in-law, was clearly the first management consultant in history. But that's about 3,000 years ago. So people have been grappling with this problem for a long time. I just think we can be conscious about it and intentional and understand that the way in which we're organizing the work shapes whether we're developing leadership or not. Does that make sense, Kevin? Can't hear you. Oh, okay. All right. Of course, all these things are much easier said than done, let me just say, okay? It's one reason why learning this stuff is continual, and coming up with ways to facilitate peer learning, sustained learning. It's like it creates a context in which then it's not just like I did it wrong, I did it right. Doing stuff wrong can create the opportunity for learning if you approach it with what Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. If failure is not perceived as a revelation about my character as a person, but rather as information about what I need to learn, we can approach learning and failure in a much more friendly way so that we can learn with each other and not be just, who's the top dog. So A lot of it does have to do with values and culture. It's a good, really good point, Kevin. Thank you for raising it.
Abel, do you want to hop in with a comment?
Yeah, I wanna name a quick point that in the reflection that Kevin just offered about how do we kind of scaffold and build leadership out, the reflection that Marshall offered a little bit ago, and even, you know, David, you raised the example of the shared purpose statement and how that was developed. I want to just name explicitly that Marshall's coaching when we were designing the shared purpose exercise process was really rooted in how do you scaffold and structure a process where everyone can be part of developing one shared purpose. We were going to jump, I think I was going to jump right into building the shared purpose with folks. And Marshall was like, well, has everyone heard each other's stories? And I was like, well, I don't think they have. You know, this is a new group coming together for the Bio Summit. And he was like, well, okay, well, how do they have a sense of each other's values? Has everyone built some relationship one-on-one and in small groups? And I was like, well, I don't think we've gotten to that quite yet as a group. And so he was like, okay, so how are you going to build that in? And the question then became, how do we take 40, 100, 300 people and create opportunities for some storytelling and relationship building to happen as a prerequisite for actually building real structure? Because it's rooted, what we're describing is rooted in relationships. And this relational commitment is really important to the way that we approach and do the work. And I think a lot of Marshall, your coaching early on was about how do we really start with the people who have already been taking responsibility, support them in building meaningful relationships, telling their story, doing that work that then makes the team building really impactful and powerful, because we do have a shared commitment that's rooted in our relationships with one another. So that relational through thread, I think, is really at the heart of a lot of what we've been talking about. I don't know that we've named it explicitly yet as like one of the really important elements of the work.
So Abel and Marshall, Marshall, go ahead.
Just to add one, because at the core of the relationships is the capacity to experience each other's values, because values are not intellectual abstractions. They're emotional commitments. I mean, it's that which moves us to choose this over that. St. Augustine said it's one thing to know the good, another to love it. Loving it is what enables action on it. Knowledge does not equal action. It takes the commitment, the motivation, the caring. And so one thing that relationship building and story sharing can do is enable us to experience each other's values and discover where we have those common concerns, which I suspect a lot of folks in this group do, and where we don't, as opposed to words that go on a mission statement. I just want to point to enhance what Abel was saying, to say values are experienced. They're not just words. And so we need to experience each other if we're able to find what the values are that we share.
So Abel and Marshall, you both are queuing up what we're about to do next so beautifully, because the next exercise is a relational exercise that we're all going to do together, and it's going to be a grand experiment. This is one of the first things that we've never tried this before, and actually it's the world has never tried this before, because we're going to use some new technology and kind of bridge some work that has been launched by Professor Tom Malone's group, and Tom is here, I think, in the audience as well. It's an application I mentioned earlier called Mingler. And it's going to enable you all to work in pairs on this larger exercise around governance and structure. Okay, so we're going to take the remainder of this time, 20 minutes, to go and do this exercise together. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys how this works. And Abel and Marshall, if you guys are able to stay, I'm very curious for you guys to participate and just try this. This is a giant experiment. We've never done this before. Nobody's done this before ever. So we're just going to see how this all works. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen right now. If you guys all go to the website, biosummit.live/governance, you will find the page that I'm on, okay? And what is shown on this webpage is the statement of shared purpose that we all created together in BioSummit 2.0, which we read earlier, and the fellows, you all heard them say it together, which is one of my favorite things, the statement of shared purpose. What we did was we took the statement of shared purpose and broke it up into 4 clauses. And the first clause, I think, most directly relates to this governance and structure question that Marshall has been asking. So you can see the shared purpose is to fundamentally transform life sciences and democratize biotechnology, to inspire creativity and improve lives by organizing life science change makers and bioenthusiasts, that's you all, to build an inclusive network, an inclusive global network. That's the first thing that we articulated in our statement. Now, if you click on this build an inclusive global network link, it brings you into a Google worksheet. Okay, and you'll notice there are a whole series of prompts. And this was something that Tom Malone and I, and also Shrestha and Salman, work together, where there's a whole series of prompts. This is an open Google Doc. Anybody can write in here. And so what we're going to do is you're going to work in pairs and basically start filling out some of these worksheets for yourselves. Talk to your partner, ask, which one you want to work on, and then you can start filling out some of these questions. What are the norms of the network? What should the activities be? What are examples of other types of networks? You can also create your own prompts. You can ask a question that you feel like should be asked. And so you'll notice, I'm going to go back over to the exercise. There's 4 of these prompts, each connecting to the statement. So another one is cultivate an accessible commons of knowledge and resources. If you click that one, that brings you into another Google document, which again has all of these questions out there for you. And critically, if you look back at the governance exercise, there's a Mingler group for every single one of these prompts. So if I want to go talk with somebody about global networks, I can click this link to Mingler, and it brings me over here. I got to log in. Uh-oh, my email has not been validated. You guys will have to believe me that I actually do have an account. I really do. But it basically will bring you into a Mingler instance where you can then, with a partner, talk about that particular prompt. And so each one of these has a Google Sheet and a prompt. And so once you're in the website, you can pick which room you want to be in. Each one of these is a different Mingler room. I have to apologize that actually, let me stop sharing the screen and show another screen because I've got Mingler on my other one, and this one should work. Excuse me. But anyways, so let's try this, okay? And for the remaining 15 minutes, let's actually open up this webpage, biosummit.live/governance, and go into Mingler, pick a topic that you want to address. And then once you're in Mingler, there'll be a lobby that's shown, you find a partner, and then you can talk together and start working away on the exercise, okay? Before I release you all into this, I think it's going to be a little bit too much chaos to try to bring us all back together at 1 o'clock to do a brief, to bring it all back together again. So I'm going to say a few parting words for the afternoon. Remember, in the afternoon, starting at 2 p.m. Eastern, so in an hour and 15 minutes, all of the afternoon sessions start. There are 6 different afternoon sessions. If you go to the biosummit.live website, you can navigate to any of the sessions that you want to right from the homepage, or go to the panels and events tab. You'll find all the stuff there. Click right into whatever Zoom room you want. There's just 6 different Zoom rooms to go and look at the afternoon material. So please enjoy yourself this afternoon. We're going to reconvene this evening at 7 p.m. Eastern back in the nucleus. We're currently in the nucleus right now. So we'll reconvene back here in the nucleus. Drew Endy from Stanford will be here to give a talk about biocitizenship and culture and so on. And then we'll do a big group of debrief. We'll all get together as a group and talk about what we learned for the day, okay? So that's where it's gonna happen at 7 p.m. Eastern. After that, there's gonna be an open mic. Some of you signed up for an open mic. Maria's gonna lead that, so please hang out for that if you would like. But 2 to 7 p.m., 6 afternoon sessions, 2 rooms full of workshops, so much content. Just go to the biosummit.live website, find whatever you want to do, and go interact with it there. Does anybody have any quick questions about that before we break up for this governance exercise? Maria and team, did I miss anything? If that all sounds good, everybody, is everybody into the governance website? So biosummit.live/governance, that's where you want to go.
If you guys have questions or you want to interact with stuff, don't forget to get on Slack too.
Yes, Slack is the other place where we're all going to be. Every single one of the programs in the afternoon, they all have a Slack channel, so you can all interact there. Can I get some thumbs ups or emojis if you guys are in the biosummit.live/governance? You guys in there? Yeah? Okay, then I'm going to keep this Zoom room open, okay? But you all can hop into Mingler and actually start working on the exercise together, okay? Hopefully it's intuitive enough. And later this afternoon, Tom Malone and I are going to be doing a 90-minute session in the governance room, all about both Supermind design, which is how we created the prompts, but we're also going to do this exercise more, okay? So if you guys are interested in doing this governance exercise more, 4 p.m. in the governance track will be there, okay? So with that, I'm going to keep this Zoom room open, but why don't we all shift over to the website, biosummit.live/governance, and let's try this out. Pick a prompt that you like, get into Mingler, and let's see what's happening. If you keep your Zoom screen open too, we can kind of see you talking and knowing that you're actually doing stuff. So feel free to stay on Zoom as well while we give this a shot. And you can also use the chat in Zoom to ask questions if you're confused about Mingler. I think Tom is still here as well, so Tom potentially could chime in with some answers to questions if anybody has any questions. So we'll keep the Zoom, we'll keep the chat, and let's give this a shot, y'all. Let's develop some relationships and try to figure out some governance. the final thing, this is open all weekend, all 3 days, anytime, 24/7, all 3 days. You want to work on a governance exercise, pop into the Mingler, find a partner, and go ahead and start working on this. Okay. So this is a big experiment, and let's give it a shot.